Welcome to Resources for State Implementation of the Anti-Trafficking Provisions of P.L. 113-183, the Preventing of Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act of 2014. I would now like to turn the call over to Christy Stankovich of the Capacity Building Center for States. Please go ahead.
Thank you, George. Welcome, everyone, to this afternoon's webinar. I'd like to first go over a few housekeeping items. You'll notice on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar pane is the Handouts feature. You'll notice we have 5 uploaded PDF handouts. We will be sending these handouts to participants after today's webinar, and we remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available soon on our website. You may post questions through the GoToWebinar pane through the questions feature. We will be filtering those to Elizabeth Lovner. At this time, I will turn it over to Kristen Zagar of the Capacity Building Center for States.
Thank you, Christy. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kristen Zagar, and I'm the Universal and Constituency Services Manager at the Center for States. Today, our featured presenter is Elizabeth Lovner, the Child Welfare Program Specialist in the Policy Division at the Children's Bureau. Also, several of my colleagues from the Capacity Building Collaborative will participate in this presentation, to include Pam Day, Melissa Correa, Charmaine Britton, and Fran Stern from the Center for States, Suzanne Garcia from the Center for Tribes, and Alicia Davis from the Center for Courts. Next slide, please. Today we're going to provide an overview of the Child Welfare Capacity Building Collaborative and an overview of the trafficking provisions of the P.L. 113-183, as well as describe the resources and assistance available to states and jurisdictions to support the planning and implementation of the trafficking provisions. On the next slide, we will discuss the collaborative. In October 2014, ICF was awarded a contract by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, to establish the new Child Welfare Capacity Building Collaborative. The Center for States, Center for Tribes, and Center for Courts are partners who form the Capacity Building Collaborative that consolidates services that had previously been provided by the National Child Welfare Resource Centers. This consolidation increases coordination, leverages resources, and provides more strategic service provision. Our goals are to work with partners and jurisdictions to support capacity building to lead to improved outcomes for children and families. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the collaborative is a partnership made up of 3 centers. Each center is led by an organization that has been working with the Children's Bureau for several years at the national level to address child welfare needs. During this presentation, we will describe these centers in detail, starting with the Center for States on the next slide. The Center for States serves state and territorial public child welfare agencies and Title 40 waiver demonstration jurisdictions. ICF International supports the Center for States, where Maggie Bishop is the project director. You might recognize ICF from our work with the Child Welfare Information Gateway, as ICF has a long history of working on technical assistance contracts with the Children's Bureau and other government agencies.
The Center for States has 2 goals. 1, improve system, organizational, and program performance. And 2, significantly enhance safety, permanency, and well-being of children, youth, and families.
The Center for States aims to provide evidence-based capacity building support services that will improve performance and support states and territories in effectively initiating, implementing, and sustaining change and innovation. To achieve this goal, we work with our partners to create and deliver coordinated, inclusive, and well-informed capacity building services. Next slide, please. In the Center for States, we have 3 service areas that offer a range of services. Our universal services promotes engagement among a broad nationwide audience of state agency professionals. We do this by developing and providing resources, tools, and products, which you will hear more about later in this webinar. You will also hear more about services offered through our constituency services, which include learning experiences and peer networking opportunities that are aimed at a targeted group of individuals or professional cohorts, And our tailored services provides direct capacity building support to state agencies and territories focusing on capacity building and implementation efforts.
The center also provides technical assistance and consultation.
And next slide, please. As stated, we work closely with our collaborative partners. And now I will turn it over to Suzanne Garcia, who will talk more about the Center for Tribes.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. At the Center for Tribes, we work with tribes to build their capacity to provide a quality array of child welfare services. We also work with the rest of the collaborative on initiatives such as this one. Foster children are inherently at risk for sex trafficking, and Native youth are disproportionately represented when you're looking at the population of children in care. This, combined with other factors, leads to the sad reality that Native youth are at high risk to be trafficked. Luckily, there was already a lot of good work going on in Indian country when this law was passed. There are a lot of good trainings about the dynamics of sex trafficking in Native populations, and a lot of resources out there. We've been working with the tribes and the regional offices to help unpack the law, and have been putting tribes in touch with the resources that we've identified. Pertinent to today's webinar, we've been collating resources and working with the collaborative so that state agencies can easily get in touch with Native subject matter experts so as to develop the agency's capacity to work with this high-risk population. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alicia Davis to talk about the Center for Courts.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Capacity Building Center for Courts. As you know, the mission of the Center for Courts is to provide direct support to court improvement programs, and by extension through courts across the country and through in the territories, to create specific learning opportunities and resources that will help to elevate legal and judicial practice. And as we go through this presentation, we'll be talking a little bit more about some of the resources and tools that we hope to develop for courts specifically in collaboration with the other centers. Next slide.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Elizabeth Lovner. I work in the Policy Division at the Children's Bureau. Just in case you're not familiar with us, our role is generally to draft regulations, provide assistance on draft legislation, interpret and provide guidance on legislation, and generally we provide day-to-day policy guidance on Children's Bureau's programs, also working to support the regional offices who really get the states and tribes' questions from day to day. So now that you have that background, I'll jump right into an overview of P.L. 113-183, the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Family Act. I assume that most, if not all of you, are somewhat familiar or very familiar with the law, so I'm going to provide a general overview of the provisions related to trafficking today and not talk about the rest of it. The primary trafficking-related provisions are these Title IV plan requirements related to identifying sex trafficking victims. So Title IV agencies are required to develop and implement procedures to identify, document, and determine appropriate services for specific children who are at risk of becoming a sex trafficking victim or who are a sex trafficking victim. I'll get to who those children are on the next slide. The Title IV agencies also have to report the number of children and youth who they identify as sex trafficking victims to HHS each year. So a sex trafficking victim is defined as a victim of sex trafficking or a severe form of trafficking in persons. One part of the severe form of trafficking in persons, as described in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is right here. So you can see sex trafficking means recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. And then this one section of the severe forms of trafficking in persons includes sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or where the person who is induced to perform that act has not attained 18 years of age. And the next important definition is just who is a child for these Title IV-E requirements around identifying, documenting, and determining appropriate services for victims of sex trafficking. And this includes children that are in the placement and care responsibility of the 4E agency, and generally that would mean children in foster care. It also includes those children who have not been removed from the home but are in the placement and care of the agency with an open case file. So those children who are in placement and care and getting in-home services. Those who have run away from foster care and are under age 18, or also up to the higher age elected under the extended provisions for Title 4E. So that could be up to age 21, depending on the state. It also includes those who are not in foster care but are getting services under the Chafee Foster Care Independence Program. And at state option, it can include anyone under age 26, regardless of whether they were ever in foster care, who is a trafficking victim. But that's a state option. It's certainly not a requirement that states include those children in that 4E requirement. There's a phased implementation of these requirements within 1 year of enactment, which is coming up really quick. They must develop these policies and procedures, and within 2 years of enactment, they have to demonstrate that they're implementing these policies and procedures. And finally, within 3 years of enactment, states are going to have to report those total numbers of children identified as sex trafficking victims to HHS. So that first milestone is coming up at the end of this month, not even quite the end of this month. The next related provision I'm going to talk about is the Title 4E requirement for locating missing children in foster care who are in foster care. So the law creates a couple new provisions, and agencies must develop and implement protocols to locate missing children from foster care. They have to determine the factors that led to that child being absent from foster care. They have to determine that child's experiences while absent from care, including whether they were a sex trafficking victim. And they have to report related information to HHS, to us. This goes into effect within 1 year of enactment, which is on the 29th of this month, coming up very soon. Title IV agencies are also going to be required to report sex trafficking victims and missing or abducted children to law enforcement. So no later, Title IV agencies have to report children who they identify as being a victim of sex trafficking to law enforcement within 24 hours of that identification. And they must report information about missing or abducted children within 24 hours to law enforcement and directly to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's not on this slide, the National Center information, but I do want to pause really quick to just tell you to look for some more information coming on this, not only from us but also from NCMEC. They have a site that they've launched, the National Center has launched, dedicated to children missing from care, and you can get to that through their website, missingkids.org. It includes resources on children missing from care for agencies, for caseworkers, for parents. And it also includes an online reporting mechanism for agencies to report those children as missing directly online. Of course, agencies can, call the National Center and report them as well, but there's that online reporting mechanism that's recently launched that can be very helpful as agencies are implementing this provision. And this last slide right here is just a reminder that the reporting to law enforcement and the reporting to the National Center, and this is still limited to a certain population of children, those in the placement and care of the agencies, those who are in the placement and care but not removed from the home and have an open case file, those who have run away from foster care and are under age 18, and those who are not in foster care but are receiving Chafee services. Okay, the final slide that I'm going to work on today is resources. So we've got the Children's Bureau website here.
The Children's Bureau website is http://www.acf.hhs.gov/programs/CB.
We've got the Child Welfare Policy Manual where we have a lot of great question and answers across all of our program areas and hopefully adding more and more soon.
The site for the Child Welfare Policy Manual is http://www.acf.hhs.gov/programs/CB. https://cbp/programs/cb/laws_policies/laws/cbpm/index.jsp.
I'll pause there to talk about a recent question and answer that we have issued in the Child Welfare Policy Manual, and it concerns when Title IV agencies can claim administrative costs related to these trafficking provisions. So we basically just reiterated that the allowable costs for administration of these provisions for these youth who are in the placement, care, supervision of the agency, or who are in any of those other categories of those children who have run away from foster care, who are receiving JP services, et cetera, including those youth up to age 26 if the state elects, that the 4E administrative costs that are allowable can be claimed by the 4E agency. What is interesting about these is that as they are doing these activities and claiming for these activities, they don't need to apply a Title IV foster care participation rate as they're allocating the allowable costs. That I don't know if that means anything to most of you on the phone right now, but that's a big deal. It takes away one more step in allocating the cost and claiming the cost so that it's claimed more directly. We also note that 4E costs can be claimed on behalf of any child who's missing from foster care for the purpose of implementing those protocols to locate and assess the children missing from care. And that includes administrative costs associated with screening and identifying whether the child is a possible sex trafficking victim. One more note on that this Title IV funding cannot be claimed for costs such as actually conducting the investigation of allegations of sex trafficking or for providing social services such as counseling or treatment. Referrals to services, yes, but not actually providing those social services. And that's in keeping with the existing Title IV fiscal requirements about what can and cannot be claimed as an administrative cost. Now, I know you don't have this up in front of you right now, and a lot of this might be policy gobbledygook to you as I talk about it. But I want to encourage you to go ahead and follow that link to the Child Welfare Policy Manual. And there on the front page, you'll see a link to, scroll down and see a link to additions to the manual. Go ahead and click on that, and it'll take you to our newest additions to the manual, including that question about administrative costs. And I hope that does help guide you in thinking about where some of the costs of implementing these provisions can be covered. Coming back to the slide, there's a link to our program instructions and information memoranda, which are very helpful, as well as my email. Feel free to reach out to me.
The site for the policy instructions and information memoranda is http://www.acf.hhs.gov/programs/cb/laws-policy-program-issuances. Elizabeth can be reached via email at elizabeth.sharp@acf.hhs.gov. That's elizabeth.sharp@acf.hhs.gov.
However, if you are a state and you have a question, I'd say the best place to start is with your regional office. If they're having trouble answering your question, they will absolutely pass it on to the policy division, and we will get back to them, and they can get back to you with that response. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Pam Day.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And good afternoon and or morning, depending on where folks are. Let me just tell you a little bit about the products that we're developing at the Collaborative, and in particular start out with the National Convening, which I think probably a number of you actually attended. If you could go to the next slide. One of the first efforts that we're delighted to be part of, was the National Convening that the Children's Bureau sponsored in Washington, D.C. in June with a number of other partners. And that convening brought together state teams including the CIP teams, court and law enforcement, the child welfare agencies, and others that have a role to play in both preventing and responding to child and youth victims of trafficking. So the focus of the summit, for those who did not attend, was to assist states in their efforts to serve children and youth victims or those at risk through collaborations that address prevention, effective identification and assessment of children and youth who are at risk or have been trafficked, securing appropriate placements for these children and youth, training and workforce training of workforce and caregivers, and provision of individualized services and support. So all those areas being really the domains of the trafficking work that's going on. The efforts we've been involved with CV in providing materials. All those materials that were collected at the convening can be made available if you don't already have access to them by contacting Christy Stankovich directly at her email address.
Christy can be reached via email at kristy.stankovich@icfi.com.
In addition to that, many of the resources, but not all, are now located on the Child Welfare Information Gateway at this URL.
The URL for the resources page at the Child Welfare Information Gateway is https://www.childwelfare.gov/topics/system-wide/trafficking/convening.
So again, if you did not attend or did not get all the resources and would like to access them, they are available on the Gateway resource page. Next slide. So the resources that we are developing, some of which are already available to you, include a couple of them that we are, Christy mentioned earlier on, that are uploaded, I think that's the right word, and will be sent to all the participants of the webinar. And those include an annotated resource list of a ton of great resources on trafficking of children and youth related to this new law.
The annotated resource list can be found at https://www.childwelfare.gov/topics/system-wide/trafficking/convening.
A list of national organizations that are addressing trafficking, and when Elizabeth mentioned NCMEC, they are one of the organizations that is listed there, and you will be able to access all of their information from going to this URL on the Gateway website, and it's listed as a related organization addressing trafficking.
A list of national organizations addressing trafficking can be found by going to https://cus.ms.rs_id=57.
We've also been collecting a great deal of information, including state policies and procedures and program examples that we think will be useful to states and jurisdictions. And those we are preparing to make available on the website and through a PDF. In the meantime, we can help if you have specific questions about what other states are doing related to a policy, a procedure, or programs. So because we've really begun to collect all this in one place, through the collaborative or the Center for States Information Services, as well as through the state liaisons from the centers, we can make sure that we gather and make those kinds of examples available to you. Not yet on the web, but lots of information that can be shared, so just let us know. We also are about to post a document known as Collaborating with Youth Service Agencies to Respond to and Prevent Sex Trafficking of Youth. And this is a relatively brief guide that provides a nice overview and helps to think through what are the various roles of different agencies in the community, because we know that in addressing trafficking, agencies really need to reach out to those who have expertise in working with youth and other agencies that have worked in trafficking. So lots of information in this guide that will be available shortly, but is also going to be sent out to you at the conclusion of the webinar. Another resource that we are working on, not yet quite ready, is a compilation of screening tools and resources that are being used to identify trafficking victims as well as those at risk. This is well underway. We have a great deal of information. Again, can provide it at individual request until, while we're putting this into a final form. So we think there's a great deal that can be helpful to the states in this document as well. Next slide. So I'm going to ask Melissa Correa to join us at this point and talk about another product that's going to be sent directly to you, and here is the title, Data Snapshot. And Melissa, I'm going to let you tell folks about it and how it might be helpful.
Thank you, Pam, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Correa, and I provide leadership at the Center for States around data-driven practice in child welfare. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a resource we developed, and it's entitled At Risk for Sex Trafficking, Youth Who Run Away from Foster Care, which is quite a long title, so we give it the nickname the Data Snapshot. And the PDF has been uploaded and is in the Handouts section if you are looking at the GoToWebinar control panel. And it's also available on the Center for States website. As noted earlier in the presentation, this legislation includes a number of requirements for new or improved data collection. And it's also instructive about what agencies must do with the data they collect. This improved documentation and reporting is intended to help inform the national response and provide appropriate services to achieve better outcomes. Youth who run away from foster care are at a high risk of becoming victims of sex trafficking. So within the new requirements are new data collection requirements directly connected to this population. Protocols to be developed and implemented include things like identifying youth missing from foster care, which was mentioned already, determining factors that contributed to the child running away, determining the child's experience while absent from care, including whether or not that child is a sex trafficking victim, and reporting related information as required by HHS and as Elizabeth described. On the next slide, we'll take a look at the data snapshot and discuss the purpose of this resource. Analysis and visualization of administrative data can provide the basis for data-driven conversations and critical thinking within child welfare agencies. This resource uses publicly available data to demonstrate what agencies can learn from easily accessible child welfare administrative data that's currently available in their own states and counties. Data like these can be used to generate urgency for action, to bring agency partners to the table. For example, the data might highlight a need for interventions aimed at distinct subpopulations, like specialized outreach to teenage girls, or increased services in a certain geographic area that has a higher than average number of documented runaways. Or the data might indicate that certain offices document very few youth who've run away, and this could raise important questions about the accuracy and completeness of data collection and might suggest the need to focus on data quality. So examining simple descriptive data helps generate important questions, which can lead to more questions which can lead to additional data collection and reporting. In the Snapshot document, we discuss the limitations of the primary data source, which is AFCARS, and we hope to increase awareness of additional analyses that states can use to better understand the problem. Several states are already using these more sophisticated techniques, and we hope this resource can help child welfare leaders ask those important questions about the data their agencies are collecting. On the next slide, we'll talk a bit more about the data sources. As I mentioned, the primary data source for this document is AFCARS, or the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System. Most of you on the call are likely familiar with AFCARS, as it's a data system required by the Children's Bureau and available at the state and county level nationwide. This document uses FY13 publicly available AFCARS files, and it focuses on children and youth who are in out-of-home care on September 30th of 2013, the last day of the federal fiscal year. This is called a point-in-time analysis. It examines children and youth on that day who have a placement type recorded as runaway. The findings using this data source are similar to those found in larger, much more sophisticated research projects, and the document we've produced references several other important works in this area.
This slide includes two infographics. The first infographic illustrates that more girls ran away than boys, with 54% of girls identified as runaways compared to 46% of boys. The second infographic illustrates that African American and Hispanic, Latino, Latina youth were more often identified as runaways in Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System, AFCARS.
On the next slide, we'll take a look at some of the data. As expected, the analysis indicated that most of the youth who ran away were teens. We compared teens who ran away from all other teens to see how the groups differ. We included youth up to age 21 with the understanding that not all states include youth over age 18 in their AFCARS submissions. So compared with other youth in care, age 13 to 21, youth identified as runaways were less likely to have a case plan goal of adoption and more likely to have goals associated with aging out. Among 13 to 21-year-olds, 42% of youth identified as runaways had 5 or more placement settings, compared to only 30% of other youth in care.
This slide includes two infographics. The first infographic illustrates that 48% of youth who ran away were expected to reunite or live with a relative, 38% were expected to age out of care, 6% were expected to be adopted, and 4% were expected to be placed with a guardian. The second infographic indicates that 42% of youth who ran away had 5 or more placement settings, 19% had 3 or 4 placement settings, and 39% had 2 or fewer placement settings.
The important question, of course, is what do these data mean from a practice perspective? How can information like this help us target preventive interventions and supports? How can it inform policy and practice changes? How can the data be used to monitor and improve performance? And what other questions do these data bring to mind? What other data do we need to collect? So going back to the first bullet, the largest proportion of youth who run away, 48%, had a case plan goal of reunification. And this data set doesn't tell us where children run to, which is a very important question. Anecdotal information that we know suggests many of the youth who run away from care do in fact run home. And since the AFCARS reporting system isn't designed to collect this type of information, we provide references to several other important works in this area where the reader can learn more. Now let's move ahead and talk about opportunities for additional analyses within jurisdictions. Information collected by child welfare agencies and data reported in AFCARS can be useful for raising awareness. The data can be used as a starting point for conversations about the characteristics and needs of this population. And we think these conversations can be enriched by bringing together stakeholders, including youth, frontline workers, caregivers, and service providers, to interpret the data from their perspective and explore in more depth what the data might indicate. However, as mentioned on this slide, this is a really basic analysis that's quite limited. Advancing the child welfare response to sex trafficking will require more sophisticated data and analysis, which are described in the Snapshot document. Using data at multiple levels can support both timely responses to youth who've run away and the development of long-term proactive strategies for reducing runaways and preventing sex trafficking. For example, real-time local case data could be used for monitoring, tracking, and outreach, And then longitudinal data analyses can support models that inform prevention initiatives. The use of multiple data sources and data sharing between state and local partners will also help better identify and assist vulnerable youth. Ideas about these types of analyses and references for additional information are included in the PDF Snapshot document. Now, on the next slide, you'll hear from Charmaine Britton about additional learning opportunities related to the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I'm going to be talking about the learning experiences that are available from the Center for States on the sex trafficking provisions. The sex trafficking laws and legislation does make a provision that all states and territories provide training on sex trafficking, and we know that that's a lot to ask of states. So the Center for States has developed full curriculum and handouts and PowerPoints that you can then use to customize to your jurisdiction. And that's real important. You can put in your data, and Melissa's already told us about how you can explore data and make it relevant and helpful to your jurisdiction. So we have placeholders in the curriculum for that. Also, another important feature of the learning experience are digital stories. And I'm actually in Portland right now and filming some digital stories, and these stories will be sprinkled throughout the curriculum. And these are stories from both survivors and staff who work with sex trafficking survivors. This curriculum is going to be available online and in Word and PowerPoint formats so that you can customize it. And a virtual train the trainer is going to be offered where we explain how you can do just that. And on the next slide, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the specifics of the curriculum. And this curriculum consists of a 10-hour foundational training for caseworkers, though we also suggest that supervisors and administrators and managers also go through this basic training. We also have a module for supervisors. How do you supervise caseworkers who are working with survivors of sex trafficking? What's different about it? And then we also have a module for administrators and managers talking about the adaptive challenges and the implementation issues and the capacity building relevant to the sex trafficking legislation. We are also developing a 2-hour caregiver training that you can offer to foster parents and other caregivers who are taking care of children and youth who have been survivors. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the goals of this curriculum. The goals, another way of saying goals, is that these are the competencies of the curriculum, and the intent of the 4 modules is to understand the impact, the laws and policies related to sex trafficking, and how that multidisciplinary response will assist you to have been victims. We're also have the competency of identifying the needs of children and youth who are at risk of or who have been victims of trafficking. One of the things that I've definitely seen in collecting these digital stories is how important it is to be trauma-informed, gender-specific, and culturally appropriate when responding to meet victims' and survivors' needs. And then lastly, we hope that the training will demonstrate collaborative practices and roles in partnering with mental health, healthcare law, law enforcement and victim services, tribes, courts, and other youth-serving organizations, because that's a very important point, is to be using a multidisciplinary approach. And then lastly, as far as the learning experience, it will be ready in October. And on the next slide, you will see that we have a webinar coming soon in October on the curriculum, and we'll be presenting information on our curriculum called Child Welfare Response to Child and Youth Sex Trafficking. The first webinar will be just about the basics of the curriculum. We'll show some vignettes of the digital story so you can get an idea of what that's like. And then we will have a virtual Train the Trainer. So please stay tuned. If you're looking for resources on curriculum and other ways to increase the knowledge and skills of your staff, the Center for States will have that available to you in October. And next I'm going to pass this on to Fran Stern, who's going to talk about our constituency groups.
Thanks, Charmaine. Just want to briefly touch on some of the supports we have planned specifically for existing stakeholder and peer groups as well as plans for future ones. We're in the process of rolling out a group focused on those state staff and others responsible for provision implementation. We encourage you to be in touch and continue to look out for additional information and details as they become available soon. This group will support peer-to-peer learning opportunities, sharing of best practices, and provide those most interested in really digging in to the particulars of provision implementation. We'll continue to provide resources and information to existing stakeholder and peer groups, and we invite folks to continue to be in touch and keep us abreast of how best to bring peer groups together. Kristen, I think you're up next.
Thanks, Fran. We will continue our outreach efforts to provide continual information and updates on the resources, learning experiences, and the constituency groups discussed today, as well as highlight all new resources and services to come. I also wanted to invite you to access our information services via the email address or phone number on your screen, as we can provide information on requests for resources, publications, statistics, legislation, and specialized research on capacity building and child welfare topics.
Inquiries can be made via email at capacityinfo@icfi.com. That's capacityinfo@icfi.com, or by phone at 1-844-222-0272.
Also, as mentioned earlier in this presentation, our tailored services provides direct capacity building supports to states and territories. The next slide provides an overview of the liaisons working in each state and territory. If you are interested in receiving individualized capacity building and implementation services, please feel free to reach out to your regional office and or your state or territory liaison to discuss setting up an assessment to determine your capacity building needs.
To contact the liaison for Alaska, American Samoa, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington State, email jennie.pettet@icfi.com. For Arizona, California, Guam, Hawaii, Nevada, and the Northern Mariana Islands, email james.coloma@icfi.com. For Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, Port Gamble, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming, email mary.iannone@icfi.com. For Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and Texas, email francine.anaya@icfi.com. For Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and South Carolina, email simon.pipkin@icfi.com. For Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin, email julie.allison@icfi.com. For Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee, email jacqueline.melton@icfi.com. For Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and West Virginia, email annn.knefel@icfi.com. For New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, email cindy.santos@icfi.com. For Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont, email kristen.selleck@icfi.com. For the complete list of current contacts, please visit the Capacity Building Center for States website at https://capacity.childwelfare.gov/map.
I will now turn it over to Alicia Davis with the Center for Courts.
Thanks. So it's exciting to be involved in this broader effort and to see the development of a number of resources that will be available for everyone that's involved in the implementation of 113-183.
The slide shows a number of images related to resources and support. It also includes one infographic of Court Improvement Program requests. The infographic illustrates specific requests from the Court Improvement Program community, with 39% of requests for assessments and screening tools, 26% of requests for information on laws, 19% of requests for best practices guide, and 16% of requests for training.
And on the far left part of the slide, you can see some of the specific requests that the Court Improvement Program community had back in June during the summit, looking at specifically at assessments and screening tools, and specifically the court's role in assessments and screening tools, having kind of an overview of the law and knowing specifically what the court's role is in the implementation of the law. And as Elizabeth presented in her overview, it's the courts in many ways are playing sort of a supportive role, and it appears that some of the ways that the courts can be particularly helpful would be in ensuring that the reporting requirements that the courts that have information available can support in that effort, as well as knowing that the court with the judge within the courtroom can assist in ensuring that the necessary screening occurs. We intend to, and you can see this on the next slide, to work with the collaborative as a whole in that constituency group that Fran and Kristen were just describing, to be able to provide the court perspective, and then also to develop through a community of practice, through a small working group, some court-specific resources. So some of the work products that have been requested would be having what we're calling a quick sheet, and it's just a glance. It's a document that you can glance at that delineates the specific elements of CQI and how you could apply that to your court practices and procedures in order to implement the law and then to measure your effectiveness in doing so. We also intend to, with the help of this community of practice, be able to identify some other resources that would be helpful for the court improvement community as well as the courts as a whole in supporting the implementation of the law. And one of those things might be an instructional memo that would set forth the court's responsibilities. On the final slide for the Center for Courts, you'll see this the CQI quick sheet that we referenced, and it is in development, and that's because we really want to make sure that it fully incorporates the needs of the courts, that it explains that well. So we intend to work with the community of practice to develop and continue to refine this tool as well as others in its development. So with that, I'll turn it back to Kristen.
Thank you, Alicia. And I want to thank all of our presenters for presenting all that information today.
Contact information for the presenters is as follows. Capacity Building Center for States. Email Kristen Zagar at kristin.zagar@icfi.com. Capacity Building Center for Tribes. Email Suzanne Garcia at suzanne@cbc4tribes.org. Capacity Building Center for Courts. Email Alicia Davis at adavis@ncsc.org. Crystal Duarte at cduarte@ncjfcj.org. Christina Cooper at CRISTINA.cooper@americanbar.org. And Ava Klein at eva.klain@americanbar.org.
Throughout this presentation, we have been receiving questions. So at this time, we'll start our question and answer session. And to start, I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. First, I'm going to address a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time. The first one was asking about a rumored assessment tool and asked if there's going to be federal guidance released about how to screen child sex trafficking victims and how prescriptive it would be. I can't address any assessment tool. I'm not aware of any plans to issue a mandatory assessment tool. And we're also not, at this time, planning to issue any specific requirements for how states must screen these children and youth as being to see if they're a child sex trafficking victim. Another question that was pre-submitted was asking about both this act as well as the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, which amends CAPTA. And they stated that they're struggling with the definition of caretaker and the role of CPS in the investigation. And we're very aware of this. That the amendments to the CAPTA definition of child abuse and neglect are separate from where the definition is now. So the caretaker piece of the CAPTA definition currently doesn't apply to that new edition of sex trafficking. So I really encourage states to work with their CB regional offices and share with each other and help each other, of course, as well, as they're trying to make these needed legislative and policy changes to incorporate a response to sex trafficking by non-caretakers as child abuse and neglect, which is traditionally defined as abuse by a caretaker. I'm going to go through some of the questions that were submitted today, and thank you again for your questions. I'll try to answer them the best that I can. We got a question about whether the open case file means a non-court-involved case, but a case the agency is monitoring and providing services, and also a question about whether this applies to probation youth. Again, I'm going to send you to your regional offices to get definitive answers on this. They'll be more familiar and be able to ask you questions about the specifics of your state laws and policies, which are really going to influence the response to this. It's possible that these kids could be included if they're under the supervision of the agency and they're getting services while still in the home. It's entirely possible they could be included. But, again, your regional office will be able to help you determine that better based on their knowledge of your state and what you can work with them with about that. Another question was what guidelines or specifics can be given in regards to how 4 agencies are to locate missing children. That's not really a great question for me from the policy perspective. I won't have a lot to offer you there. I can direct you also to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Again, I think they're a great resource and a great place to start. They provide a lot of help in locating missing kids, coordination with law enforcement, and again, that website to get started is cmfc.missingkids.org. And they've got some resources there as well as the ability to report directly and are definitely available to states to help them. Another question we got was about, let's see, here's a good question. Whether whether 4A agencies are required to report missing kids to both law enforcement and NCMEC separately and directly. And the answer to that question is yes. They have to. 4A agencies are required to make a report to law enforcement and make a separate report to the National Center. This may be duplicating. I know that there's a new law that's requiring law enforcement to report missing kids to the National Center, but that's what's in Title 4E. You must make a report to both law enforcement and to the National Center. You can't rely on law enforcement then reporting later on. Another question was asking about children receiving chafee services over age 18 and others who might be over age 18 in that population that's being required to be reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The National Center, we've worked with them a little bit. They're aware of what the requirements of the law are, and they're prepared to work with you on those reports, as they're traditionally going to accept them only for children under age 18. But they are aware of what the requirements of 113 and 183 are. So states should, moving forward, just go ahead and report those children to the National Center either way, or at least reach out and attempt to make that report. Another question was, can you give a few examples of factors that led to the child being missing from foster care? This was almost touched on a little bit earlier in the presentation. I don't think we're going to be issuing any guidance that's going to specifically say that these are the factors you must be providing data on, but I think these are things like a conflict with caregivers. Obviously, if they're a victim of trafficking and that influenced them to run from care, if there's a mental health issue, there's lots of things that could contribute to it. And as states are working with those youth and determining why they ran, those will be able to be categorized by the state a little more clearly, I think. Another question was about a delayed implementation of submitting policy for the 4E plan, and I'm not sure exactly which requirement that's referring to, so I'll ask you to take a look at our PI on our website. That's going to be PI 1507, and that includes instructions for submitting the Title 4E plan, and will include any information on delayed effective dates for some of the provisions. And let's see, is there anything else? I think we have a question about a specific training system being identified, and I'm not sure if I think that's something I'll pass on to some of the other presenters. And some more questions are coming in that I'm just getting a take. Okay, I'm going to repeat what I said about the caregiver definition and CAPTA amendments. The CAPTA, this additional law that I was just speaking about, the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act. We also have an IM out on that, IM 1505. IM 1505 on our website that summarizes that. Basically, it amends CAPTA to include in the definition of child abuse and neglect trafficking of children, sex trafficking of children. The definition of child abuse and neglect in CAPTA traditionally is, and still is, it speaks about what caregivers have done. So abuse and neglect committed by caregivers. The trafficking portion of this does not have to be committed by a caregiver to be included in that definition of child abuse and neglect. So as we understand, for agencies, that's it's sort of a different way of looking at child abuse and neglect when we're talking about something that's not been committed by a caregiver. I hope that helps explain it more, and if it doesn't, I apologize, and please, as always, feel free to reach out to your regional office to get some more information. I also want to mention, as we're talking about runaway and homeless youth and talking about reasons for why youth have run away, the guidance from the Children's Bureau and the Family and Youth Services Bureau that describes how child welfare agencies can work with runaway and homeless youth programs to identify and provide coordinated services to youth who have run away from foster care. Okay. And who should we send our policy to? That's someone else is asking about. Yes, that's going to that's been answered already. Sorry, I'm going through these questions as they're coming in. I apologize as I stumble over them. I think that's about all the questions I can answer today. I'm actually going to send out to you all the link directly to the National Center's page about children missing from care. Any other questions that I may have not gotten to or that come up later, you can feel free to send them to me as my email address was posted, or please reach out to your regional offices. Send them to your regional offices. If they are unable to answer them because we have not provided guidance and it's a tricky question, they will send it up to the policy division, and we will get a response out for you and share that more broadly. And I'm not sure there's any more questions that any of the other presenters wanted to jump in and answer, possibly the one about the specific training systems. But otherwise, I'll wrap up my piece.
This is Charmaine. Could somebody send me the question about the training system?
Oh, sorry, I just realized that you can't see that, Charmaine. I apologize.
That's okay. I'm happy to answer it if I can.
Well, I can read it out loud to you, too, if maybe that will help. No, I can't find it. I apologize. Or maybe someone sent it to you. Let's see.
Hi, I can read it out loud.
Okay, thank you. I'm having a hard time finding it.
That's okay. The question is, have a specific training system been identified, such as, and I am going to butcher this acronym, but it's WCWPDS/MCWP for Wisconsin been identified? So it's a specific training system for Wisconsin.
In the course of developing our curriculum, we got tons of information from a variety of sources. So this particular curriculum addresses what's necessary in the provisions, and then also best practices related to working with survivors for our 4 different audiences of caseworkers, supervisors, and administrators and managers and caregivers. As far as like a best training system, we think that this compiles the best of various approaches to training on this issue and puts it all into one place. And it will be full curriculum with the instructions to the trainer as well as the content to be presented, and again, with notations about how you can customize it. It also has the addition of the digital stories as well that can be used throughout the training. I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but I can tell you that we used and looked at multiple trainings by various states when developing this curriculum.
And Charmaine, we did have another question related to that come in. I did assign it to you, but I can sure read it out loud. Where will the training curriculum be referenced and be posted, and when will it be available?
We're thinking that it'll be available mid-October towards the end. There will be a notice going out, an email blast notifying you of the webinar that we will be holding and to announce the curriculum, and then it'll be posted on our learning management system for the center, and you can very easily download it from there. So stay tuned on that. Be watching your email. We'll have email blast letting you know that we will be hosting the webinar. We'll then be archiving the webinar if you can't make it, and we'll make a pretty big splash about letting folks know that this training is available.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth and Charmaine, for going through the question and the answers. This brings us to a close for the webinar. We wanted to thank you for your participation and encourage you to reach out to us and access and utilize the resources that we discussed today.
For more information, visit the Child Welfare Capacity Building Collaborative at https://capacity.childwelfare.gov.
Following this webinar, you will receive the 5 handouts that are available and that you can see on your screen, which does include the PI 15-07 that Elizabeth referenced. And we thank you for your participation and have a great day.